Hello and welcome. My name is Flower Grows and welcome to another video on the Ableton Live manual tutorial series. So that's just another fun beat I've made. It doesn't have anything to do with the video, but today we're going to be covering the link tempo and MIDI settings in Live. Last video we covered 2.3.3, which was audio. Now we're covering link tempo and MIDI. So the manual actually sends us to three different entire chapters of the manual, so this might be a longer video. This is chapter 34 in the manual, synchronizing via link. Ableton Link is a technology that keeps devices in time over a wired or wireless network. Link is built into Live as well as a growing number of iOS applications, and any link-enabled software can play in time with any other link-enabled software simply by joining the same network. When using Link, you can start and stop playback of each device application independently of every other connected device application. Link-enabled software will remain in tempo as well as at the correct position in relation to the global launch quantization of all participants. So if you are curious what applications it might be talking about, there are many. As you can see here, 260. This is on Ableton's site. If you go to link up here, right, this is literally the main Ableton site. You can buy all platforms. Let's say if you are looking for iOS, there's still many, 190. Let's stay with all platforms. There's many kinds of applications. There's many visual applications. There's various synths. Again, here, light jams, something for interactive DMX lighting. And of course, there's other DAWs like Logic Pro, Note version of Ableton, which is just Ableton but for iOS. So yeah, there's many applications in this list. So setting up Link. To configure Live to use Link, first make sure that your computer is connected to the same network as any other device that you will use Link with. So what that means is you have to be on the same Wi-Fi network if you want to use Link on, let's say, your MacBook and your iPad. So then you open Live's link tempo and MIDI settings and enable the button next to show link toggle. So it says here, so actually I've got it off. If I turn it on, if you look over here, link shows up in the top left of the screen. It is possible to sync start and stop commands across all connected apps to have start stop sync enabled. To do this, click the button next to start stop sync. So this is this button here. What turning this on is going to do is that if you have link enabled and you're connected to at least one other device, then starting the session, stopping the session, and synchronizing the tempo is all going to be linked to each other. When on, the toggle will update to show the number of link-enabled apps or instances of Live that are on the same network, such as you can see here. It says one link. So I'm going to go on my Note app on my iPad, and I'm going to demonstrate for you because Note is one of the apps that allows link. So first I'm going to turn on Link in Live, and it's already connected. What I had to do yesterday to get it to work is I went to the settings of the Note app, and you can see right there, Link and MIDI. So you go to Link and MIDI, and first you have to turn on Ableton Link with the switch, and you can also turn on sync start stop, and then it will link automatically with Ableton. You don't You don't have to do anything else. So if at least one other link enabled app or instance of Live is connected, the arrangement position display will show a moving progress bar whenever Live's transport is not running. This bar is a representation of Live's sets. This bar is a representation of the Live set's global launch quantization in relation to that of the other participants in the link session. After you trigger playback, Live will wait until this bar is filled before starting. So you may be wondering, what is this useful for? Why not just, I don't know, if you're collaborating with someone, why not just send your live session to them? They can work on it and they send it back or something like that. Well, it's useful for many different things. One, for example, is for all of these lighting apps and visual apps. There's plenty of them, and as you may know, if you want to design live lights for your audio, it has to be in time. You can do it usually by tapping the tempo or something, but it will never be as perfect as when it's actually linked to the song. So that's one application. Another application is live performance with another producer. So they can be on their instance of Live and you can be on yours, or they can be on a synthesizer, on an iPad or something, and everything they do will be perfectly in sync with you because it's linked. So the first app or live instance to join a link session will set the initial tempo for the others. So in my case, because I started with Live on my MacBook, that is what's going to set the tempo for the others. Any link-enabled apps or instances of Live can then change their tempo at any time, and all others will follow. So that's the initial tempo, right? It's going to be 117, but if I now change it on my iPad, then it will also change in this instance of Live. If multiple participants try to change the tempo simultaneously, everyone else will try to follow, but the last one who changes the tempo will win. The last person to change the tempo, if multiple are doing it at the same time, is going to win that argument. Tempo changes made by any participant in a live session will override tempo automation in your live set. You can tell the Ableton tempo to change over time using the automation mode here, which again, we're going to go into that in later videos, but let's say that's what the tempo is going to be changing like. You can see up here, if we scroll through, or we can scroll through using this, right? If you have link enabled and the tempo changes, it's going to override that. So the automation is not going to apply anymore. Note that the metronome's recording count-in cannot be used when link is enabled. You can have a count-in here, right? None, 1 bar, 2 bars, 4 bars. So I've turned link off, and you can see the behavior right now. It's counting me in for a bar, and then it starts recording my creepy song. If I turn link on, it's just going to go straight to recording. So that's something to bear in mind. In most cases, link will work without issues as soon as it is enabled and will provide reliable synchronization under all conditions. But if you have any issues, you can go to the link FAQ in the knowledge base. So this will take you to a website. You can watch the video from Live. So that was link, the show link toggle and stop sync. We're going to move on now to tempo follower. Okay, so next part of the chapter is synchronizing via tempo follower. So this next section is a little bit hairy, but I've done a lot of experimenting to try and explain it. Yeah. You might encounter situations where a link connection or MIDI clock are not available, or sometimes you might prefer not to use a rigid computer-generated clock. Right, so it's talking about link here and how you're stuck with the grid here. You're stuck with these bars. If you're collaborating with someone, if you're collaborating with a group of musicians, maybe you don't want to be forced to stick to Ableton's quantization and to this very electronic feel. So you might like to have a more natural push and pull of a drummer in your band, or maybe turntables. So this is where tempo follower comes in, and this is the next part of the settings. Setting up tempo follower. To set an external audio input as a source for tempo follower, first open Live's link tempo and MIDI settings. We've already done that. Set the input channel, external input, to the input on your audio interface that is connected to the source you wish to follow. So remember from last lesson, first, you definitely have to have a driver type connected. If you don't, then if you go here, you can't even select an input channel. So you have to select an audio driver, and then you have to select an input device. In my case, it's my interface, right? And again, Scarlett Solo. And then you go here and you see the microphone I'm speaking into is now the external input. Note that while Tempo Follower's algorithm is optimized for use with audio signals that have a clear rhythm, you can also be creative and experiment with different sources. Once you, let's say this is on hide in your preferences, you will not see it up here, but if you press the button here, it will say show, and you can see follow right next to link up there. And let's say we turn it on, so I'm going to press follow. Oh, and you can see the tempo now changing. And because it's listening to my voice, it has no idea what to do, right? It's jumping between 150 and 108. Activating the follow button would turn on Tempo Follower, and Live will begin listening to the configured audio source and interpreting its tempo. When Tempo Follower can be connected to the audio input device channel specified in the settings, the feature is disabled and the follow button will appear grayed out. So I've made some experiments with this. I used this microphone to do some clapping sounds and various other things with my voice as well. Okay, it works, but it's extremely finicky. Once it gets it and you make tiny changes to it, fine, it works. But other than that, like, oh my god, I don't know. I don't know if it's quite there yet. My conclusion was that it's very sensitive. If you have a very good drummer who is able to keep a constant rhythm, but also to very slowly and gradually, linearly change the tempo, then it's great, and then it should work. But it works in a very specific way. But you should try it out if you want, and I think the idea is very fascinating. But yeah. So next we have synchronizing via MIDI. I can recommend this video by Splooty Vision. It explains how MIDI clock works pretty well. So if you have any more questions about MIDI clock, I recommend this. I will leave a link in the description. But here's what the manual says. So if you're working with devices that don't support link, you can synchronize via MIDI. The MIDI protocol defines two ways to synchronize sequences, both of which are supported by Live. Both protocols work with a notion of a sync host, which delivers a sync signal that is tracked by the sync devices. So it's commonly known as the master and the slave. You can have one master and as many slaves as you want, usually, and the master tells all of the slaves what the tempo is. It constantly sends out MIDI messages about the tempo. So what is the MIDI clock? The MIDI clock works like a metronome ticking at a fast rate. The rate of the incoming ticks is tempo dependent. So changing the tempo at the sync host, such as a drum machine or Live or anything, will cause the device to follow the change. The MIDI clock protocol also provides messages that indicate the song position. With respect to MIDI clock, Live can act as both a MIDI sync host and device, so a master and a slave. So where you can find this in this page of the settings is if you go to the input and output ports here, and I don't have any synths connected, but I have Macs, and you can also send MIDI clock over to Macs and other things. If you click the arrow right next to it there, you can see various settings to do with the MIDI clock. So sync type MIDI clock, that's the standard sync type. So everything should be MIDI clock. But as you press on this, you also see MIDI timecode. And then you can see MIDI timecode frame rate, and that looks very much like film frame rate. So that's actually what this next section talks about. So MIDI timecode is the MIDI version of the SMPTE protocol. So you can see it here. It's just a way to synchronize everything in things like cinema. There's a whole bunch of protocols to do with it. It stands for Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. It's a standard of synchronizing tape machines, computers in the audio and film industry. A MIDI timecode message specifies a time in seconds and frames, subdivisions of a second, and Live will interpret a timecode message as a position in the arrangement. So this again is very useful if you're working with film frames, because if you have 24 frames per second, for example, then you can divide that second by 24, and then you can link the audio directly to that. So next, synchronizing external MIDI devices to Live. Live can send MIDI clock messages to an external MIDI sequencer or drum machine. After connecting the sequencer to Live or setting it up to receive MIDI sync, turn the device on as a sync destination in Live's link, tempo, and MIDI settings. Hello, just to explain for a moment, I lost about 2 hours of filming footage thanks to OBS. And yeah, I'm just going to go through the settings themselves. I'm not going to read through the manual with you. I'm going to be using this Atom Presonus, this Presonus Atom MIDI controller here. I mainly use it for the pads here to finger drum. I'm going to connect it to Ableton. I'm going to show you exactly everything you can do with the MIDI settings. So I just connected it. As you could see, suddenly the Atom shows up. Now I'm going to explain to you exactly what everything means. So we've gone through link, we've gone through tempo follower, we've gone through these timing settings here. What is this MIDI section? What is the track sync remote and MPE? What is the difference between input and output? And what is this takeover mode? So first of all, I'm going to go through my Atom with you so that you can see an example of a case study or something that I use, and you might use something completely different. But so first of all, let's look at these ports here, right? So I would encourage you to think of Ableton almost like this hardware audio interface. Now, what are you putting into this interface? What are you taking out through the outputs? For me, I'm going to turn all of these off, and then we can have a think. So, first of all, what does track mean? Track, I can show you the info view in the bottom left. Track means that you are sending MIDI either to Live or from Live. So if you want to receive MIDI into Ableton, so if you want to send something to that hardware Live audio interface, then you have to turn track on, and now Ableton is going to track whenever I play on my Atom, and you can see it as we've discussed before up here, right? So actually I don't know if I recorded that footage might be missing. So okay, another thing just before I move on. These lists here, as you can see, it says control surface, input, output, are for natively supported interfaces. The Atom does show up here, but actually for me it doesn't tend to work, so I prefer to do it manually right here. Sometimes you will have to do that. The push works perfectly, so It depends on your interface. There's many here. You can go through the whole list and see if your one's here. Now it's working correctly. You can see up here, right? If you hover above this, it says this indicator flashes when live tracks send MIDI messages. And basically what the orange one means is there's input. The blue one at the bottom means there's output, but there's no output going out of live. There's only an input of the Atom MIDI going into live. So that's why it's flashing orange. So that's the first thing we've done. Now, if we want to try to record something, let me load up some drums. I have a whole bunch of faders right at the top here. I would love to use these to control stuff in Ableton, what I have to do now. So that's something else. That's not track. That is, in fact, remote. So if you go to, again, you can hover above it, enable the remote switch for any input ports which will be used for remote control of live. The key/MIDI in indicator between the MIDI and key buttons in the control bar. So it's talking about this indicator here. Again, it's very small, but these keys up here, these squares up here are really useful, especially when you're troubleshooting. So let's go back. So this will flash when live receives a MIDI message it can use. Okay, so let's think about Ableton again, right? It's the hardware audio interface. What do we want to send in and what do we want to send out? Well, I also now want to send info from these knobs to control live. So that's going into live, so it's an input port, and so we can turn on remote to remote control live. So that's great. Now you can open the browser with Command Option B and then Command M to turn on MIDI mapping mode. This is something I'm going to talk about in future videos more. Essentially, now you can map your MIDI controller, any of the buttons, any way you like. So I'm going to press on the ones I want to control, and then I'm going to move the knob to assign it. So that's this one, that one, that one, and this one. I'm going to press Command M again to exit MIDI mapping mode, Command Option B to exit the browser. And now, as you can see, I can control these. This moves us to Takeover Mode. As you could maybe see it just a moment ago, a little message appeared, right? Bit depth is awaiting pickup. It's telling me that my knob is currently at a value of 1. I'm going to have to move it up to 10 to pick it up. And now it's picked it up. And now I can control bit depth with my knob. So what takeover means, this is a way for lives, sliders and knobs and buttons to communicate with your hardware. Think of it as this, right? I can, for example, change the downsample now to 20 or 12, let's do 12.5, but my knob, I haven't touched my actual hardware MIDI controller at all. So my MIDI controller is still at like 1. MIDI is actually counted from 1 to 127. And so now there's a scaling problem. So this is what takeover mode is about. You can see it here in the info view. Select your preferred takeover behavior for MIDI controllers that send absolute values. So I'm going to explain each of these. None means it jumps. That's the problem, right? So if, for example, if I move this down to 1, my MIDI knob is still at like 12. So now it's going to jump to 12. You might not want that if you're recording or performing. It would be quite a harsh transition and quite unnatural. So pickup is the one that I like. It's the one that I use. So if I move this over, let's say 2.94, it's going to give me the message. I'm going to see it. Okay, so I'm quite high. I have to go down. And now I can pick it up and control it live again. In terms of value scaling, this one's a bit more mathematical, and essentially I can show you the example again. So I'm going to move this down to 1, and then it's going to scale the values to sort of jump, right? You can see it do sort of tiny little jumps until they're both at the same value, the software knob and the hardware knob. And now it's moving smoothly. I can show you again. I'm going to move to 1, and you can see it jumping there. So it's not as harsh as none, but it's not as smooth as pickup. It's sort of in between. So yeah, it depends on how smooth you want that transition to be from the software world to the hardware world. I like pickup. That's my preferred one because it's the smoothest one. Although you might find it annoying that, you'll see the message and you'll be like, oh, why can't I control this? What's wrong? But you just have to remember the mode you picked. So we've got track enabled. That's sending MIDI into live. We've got remote. That's sending, that's letting the Atom remotely control live, as the name suggests. Now, what is sync? So enable the sync switch for any input port, which will be used for synchronization of live. Sync is actually used for tempo. So tempo quantization, where in the track you are. If you're using a sequencer, anything like that, as we've discussed before, right, you can use the MIDI clock here, that's the standard, but also you can actually use a song here, and my Atom isn't smart enough for this because it doesn't have a sequence or anything like that, but it's getting the information of exactly where live is in the song, like bar 49. If I move it, the Atom's going to know it's at bar 33. That's what this song here means. And whereas pattern mode is simpler because that's just stop and start messages. And actually, I can actually change this to pattern mode because, as you can see in the info view here, my MIDI device does not recognize SPP messages, which is short for song position pointer. So there's no difference if I do that. But I do want to turn sync on in the output ports, and I'm going to explain why. So again, sync is all about rhythm. Sync is all about tempo, quantization, and that sort of thing. And we've talked before about slave and master sort of mentality when it comes to tempo. So you have to think about, okay, so Ableton is this hardware device. Who here is the master? I want Ableton to be the master. I just want the Atom here to be a finger drumming thing and potentially use it to repeat some notes and stuff. So I want it to listen to live's tempo. So that means live is outputting sync. Again, remember, sync is tempo. So you go to the output ports, you turn on sync, and now if I do note repeat on my Atom, I'm going to turn on the metronome here. It's almost on time. And actually, that's where you can use this MIDI clock sync delay, because clearly there is a little bit of incorrect latency, right? It says in the info view. I'm going to do it just a little bit earlier. There we go. 25.5 milliseconds, and now it's perfectly in time with the metronome. So we stumble upon yet another thing in the settings here. If you've turned on sync and you're using an arpeggiator or sequencer or a note repeat function, but it's slightly out of time, this is what the sync delay here is for. You can just play around, that's what I do. And just usually there's an extra delay, so you can actually take away from the 0 time until it sounds perfectly in time. So that's what track, sync, and remote does. I've explained takeover mode. MPE, what is MPE? MPE stands for MIDI polyphonic expression, and you have to have a specific MIDI controller that has MPE built into it to use this. So for example, the push is one of those. What it means is you're able to control multiple parameters for one individual note at the same time. And that's everything. And now I can play my MIDI controller without problems. Great fun. I keep link and tempo follower hidden up here when I'm not using it. Remember that there's another indicator here, which is sync. When, for example, when I'm playing the metronome here, you can again see this blue little LED flash. Even when I turn it off, it's still sending that MIDI clock information out. Remember, blue is for out, orange is for in. And if I were to send MIDI clock information in, then the orange LED here would flash. And that's pretty much it for the link, tempo, and MIDI settings. It looks complicated, but what you have to remember really is these first two are very, very optional, and you hardly will ever use them. The show resync button is also very specific, only for when you're using hardware and hardware synths in particular. This control surface little Excel table here is mostly just for natively supported MIDI control surfaces. So if you've got one, great. If you don't, that's fine. You don't even have to worry about this. And then the only really important thing to nail is this takeover mode and the input and output ports. And remember, track is MIDI information. So that is actually what you're using to play MIDI notes. Sync is to do with time and tempo, and remote is to do with controlling Live's interface. And MPE, you only have to worry about if you have an MPE control surface. It stands for MIDI polyphonic expression, and it's something entirely different. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. Try not to turn on too many of these, like if I turn on everything, it's still gonna work, but there's more potential for hiccups. So try only to turn on the options that are absolutely necessary. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope it was useful. I spent a whole lot of time researching this particular part of the settings because it is quite confusing at first, but the next part of the settings in the user manual is going to be much easier, trust me. So I'll see you in the next one.